My husband raised his glass to toast the happy couple, then turned to me and made me the joke of the night. What he didn't know was that I had been listening for 5 years. They laughed when he called me his little window into another world. He thought humiliating me in front of his family would break me. The night he made me a punchline, I became something else. She recorded my humiliation on her phone, smiling. 6 months later, that recording was the least of their problems. He said I was too naive to ever figure anything out. He said I thought love conquered all. He was right about one thing: I was figuring it out. They thought the quiet girl from Ohio would just disappear. They were wrong. I was just getting started. My name is Lily, and this is my story. It was the kind of party my mother would have called a command performance. An invitation from my husband's family wasn't really an invitation. It was a summons you couldn't ignore, not if you valued the fragile peace of your marriage. The occasion was his cousin's engagement, a lavish affair held at a country club that smelled of old money and fresh flowers. I spent 2 hours getting ready, my stomach a tight knot of anxiety. I chose a deep emerald dress, one that Mark, my husband, had always said brought out the green in my eyes. I wanted to look nice. I wanted, for once, to fit in. My name is Lily, and for 5 years, I have been the square peg in the round hole of the Ashford family. Mark's family is the kind of wealthy that doesn't need to talk about it. They summer in Maine, winter in Aspen, and their conversations are filled with references to people and places I've only ever seen in movies. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the daughter of a high school principal and a nurse. Our wealth was measured in Friday night lights and home-cooked meals. Marrying Mark felt like stepping into a fairy tale, but I've learned that fairy tales often have wicked stepmothers, and in my story, that role was played by his mother, Victoria, and his sister, Paige. Mark, my charming prince, seemed to shrink into a footman the moment we entered their world. To understand why that night broke me the way it did, you have to understand where I came from. My hometown was called Millbrook, a place so small that everyone knew everyone's business, but in a good way. My father, Thomas, was the principal at Millbrook High School for 23 years. He was the kind of man who remembered every student's name, who went to their games and their plays and their graduation parties. My mother, Ellen, worked nights as a nurse at the county hospital so she could be home during the day with my brother and me. Our house was small, a 3-bedroom ranch with a porch swing my father built with his own hands. We didn't have much, but we had enough. We had love. We had Friday night dinners where everyone talked at once. We had Sunday morning pancakes and Saturday afternoon yard work. We had a life that felt full. I met Mark Ashford during my junior year at Ohio State. I was studying education, planning to become a teacher like my father. He was a graduate student in business, handsome in a way that made me forget my own name. We met at a coffee shop near campus. I was studying for an exam, and he asked if the seat across from me was taken. It wasn't. We talked for 3 hours. He was charming, funny, interested in everything I had to say. He asked about my hometown, my family, my dreams. No one had ever asked me so many questions. When he asked for my number, I gave it without hesitation. Our courtship was a whirlwind. He took me to restaurants I had only read about, to plays and concerts and weekend trips. He introduced me to a world I didn't know existed, a world of fine wine and intelligent conversation and effortless elegance. I was dazzled. My parents were cautious but supportive. They saw how happy he made me. They saw how he looked at me. They trusted my judgment. When he proposed, 2 years later, I said yes without a moment's hesitation. The ring was a diamond so large I was almost embarrassed to wear it. The wedding was held at his family's country club, a place I had only seen in photographs. My parents hosted a small reception in Millbrook for our Ohio friends and family, and Mark was gracious and charming throughout. He danced with my mother, talked sports with my father, played catch with my little cousins. Everyone loved him. Everyone thought I had won the lottery. The first year of marriage was good. We lived in a beautiful apartment in the city. I finished my degree and started teaching at a public elementary school, something Mark's family found puzzling. Why would I work when I didn't have to? But I loved it. I loved the children, the chaos, the sense of purpose. Mark seemed proud of me, at least at first. He would tell his friends about his wife, the teacher, and they would nod approvingly. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. The first crack appeared at our first Thanksgiving with his family. I offered to help in the kitchen, a habit from my own family where everyone pitched in. Victoria looked at me as if I had suggested we eat on the floor. "The staff handles the kitchen, dear," she said. "Why don't you go sit with the others?" I sat in the living room, surrounded by people who discussed things I knew nothing about, feeling utterly alone even with my husband beside me. On the drive home, I mentioned feeling out of place. Mark laughed it off. "You'll get used to it," he said. "They just need time to warm up to you." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that love was enough to bridge the gap between Millbrook and the Ashford world. But the cracks multiplied. There was the time I made my mother's meatloaf recipe for dinner, and Mark pushed it around his plate without eating. "Honey, we don't really eat this," he said. There was the time I suggested we go camping for our anniversary, and he looked at me as if I had lost my mind. Camping. Like in a tent? There was the time I mentioned that my parents were struggling with my father's medical bills, and he offered to write a check, not understanding that what I wanted was empathy, not charity. With his family, the cracks became chasms. Victoria never missed an opportunity to comment on my clothes, my hair, my manners. Paige followed her mother's lead, her insults wrapped in smiles that fooled everyone but me. Mark's father, Richard, was distant but not unkind. He seemed genuinely unaware of his wife and daughter's cruelty. And Mark, my husband, my partner, my supposed safe place, became increasingly silent in their presence. He would stand by while they picked at me, offering no defense, no comfort. Later, he would apologize, blame the wine, blame his mother's difficult personality, blame me for being too sensitive. And I, desperate to believe in our love, would accept his apologies and try harder to fit in. The party that changed everything was not the first time Mark had humiliated me. It was just the first time he had done it so publicly, so deliberately, so cruelly. Looking back, I can see the warning signs I had ignored for years. The jokes at my expense that weren't really jokes. The way he would correct my pronunciation of words in front of others. The time he told his college friends that I had never been out of the country before meeting him, as if my life before him was a blank space waiting to be filled. I had explained away each incident, rationalized each slight, convinced myself that I was being too sensitive. But that night, with the champagne flowing and the spotlight on me, there was no explaining away what he did. The party was in full swing by the time we arrived. A jazz trio played near the bar, and the air glittered with the sound of clinking glasses and polished laughter. Mark's hand was a tense weight on the small of my back as we navigated the crowd. He barely looked at me. "Remember," he murmured, his smile fixed for the benefit of anyone watching, "just try to be yourself, but maybe a little quieter." The words were a small, familiar sting, a preemptive strike. He was already embarrassed of me, and we hadn't even said hello yet. We found his family at a large, round table near the dance floor. Victoria, a woman whose face was a testament to the power of expensive skincare and restrained expressions, offered a cheek for me to peck. She smelled of Chanel and disapproval. Paige gave me a once-over, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Lily," she drawled, "love the dress. Is it from that little boutique in the mall? The one with the reasonable prices?" I felt heat creep up my neck. "It's from a designer in the city, actually," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "Oh, is it?" Paige said, turning to her mother with a look of mock surprise. They shared a silent, knowing glance that was more cutting than any insult. I was an outsider trying on their world, and they could always tell. The evening wore on. I stood by Mark's side as he talked to his uncles about stocks and golf handicaps. I smiled and nodded, a silent accessory. When I tried to join a conversation with some of the other wives, mentioning a book I'd just read, Paige deftly steered the topic back to a charity gala she was planning, a world so far removed from my own that I might as well have been speaking a different language. The worst part was the drinking. Mark, usually a man of 1 or 2 beers, was matching his cousin's drink for drink, scotch on the rocks. His laughter grew louder, his gestures more expansive. And with every glass, his gaze slid past me more and more until I felt completely invisible. Then came the toasts. The engagement toast was sweet, full of hope and promises. Then someone's uncle stood up to toast the happy couple's parents. Then a friend of the family told an embarrassing but loving story about the groom as a child. The champagne flowed. The mood was warm. And then Mark stood up. He clinked his glass with a spoon, the sharp, insistent sound cutting through the chatter. The table went quiet, all eyes turning to him with fond expectation. He was, after all, the handsome, successful older cousin. "I'd like to say a few words," he said, his voice slightly too loud. He was swaying just a little. My heart, which had been thudding with a low-grade anxiety all night, began to race. This wasn't planned. "We're all so happy for David and Chloe," he began, gesturing grandly towards the beaming couple. "A match made in heaven, two people from similar backgrounds." A ripple of knowing laughter. He took another gulp of his scotch. "It makes you think, doesn't it? About the choices we make, the risks we take." He turned then, his eyes finding me at the end of the table. But it wasn't the look of a husband sharing a private joke. It was the look of a performer acknowledging the prop. "See, I took a risk," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone that was still perfectly audible to the whole table. "I went for something different. Exotic, even." A few people chuckled, unsure of where this was going. "My wife, Lily," he said, pointing his glass at me. "She's from Ohio." He said it the way someone else might say, from Mars. The word hung in the air, an object of curiosity and mild pity. "And let me tell you, it's been an education," he continued, encouraged by the titters. "Before Lily, I didn't know that people actually ate casserole as a main course. Or that a vacation could mean a tent." He laughed, a loud, barking sound. "She's taught me so much about the real America. You know, the one with the strip malls and the water towers." The table was silent, but it was a stunned, horrified silence. Victoria had a hand delicately pressed to her chest, her eyes wide with feigned shock, but the corners of her mouth were twitching. Paige was openly grinning, her phone in her hand, probably recording this moment of triumph. I felt the blood drain from my face, then rush back in a hot, sickening wave. The world seemed to narrow to the sound of my own heartbeat and the cruel, slurred words coming from my husband's mouth. "She's my little window into another world," Mark said, raising his glass. "To Lily, thanks for the cultural exchange." He sat down to a smattering of awkward, uncertain applause from those too far away to hear the venom in his words. A few people near us were studying their plates, unable to look at me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just sat there, a public exhibit of his condescension, my entire existence reduced to a punchline. I looked at Mark. He was reaching for the bottle of scotch, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. He didn't look at me. He didn't see the tears burning in my eyes. He didn't care. In that moment, I didn't just feel humiliated. I felt murdered. The woman he married, the woman he claimed to love, had been killed in front of 100 people, and the murderer was sitting right next to me, pouring himself another drink. I don't remember leaving. I remember the cold air hitting my face, a shocking contrast to the suffocating heat inside. I remember fumbling with my car keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove home in a blur of streetlights and tears, my mind a white noise of pain and disbelief. The drive took 45 minutes, and I remember every second of it. I remember the way the streetlights blurred into golden streaks through my tears. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I remember screaming. Just screaming, alone in the car, the sound swallowed by the hum of the engine and the rush of wind through the cracked window. I screamed until my throat was raw, until there was nothing left but hollow, heaving sobs. I parked in the garage of our building and sat in the car for a long time, unable to move. The garage was dim and quiet, the kind of place where sounds echo off concrete. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and uneven. I could hear the distant hum of the elevator. I could hear the thudding of my own heart, which seemed determined to beat its way out of my chest. When I finally went upstairs, I didn't turn on the lights. I walked through the apartment in the dark, past the furniture we had chosen together, past the photographs on the walls, past the kitchen where we had cooked countless meals. Everything looked different now, tainted. The life we had built together felt like a lie. I sat on the floor of the living room, my back against the sofa, and I waited. I waited for him to come home. I waited for an apology. I waited for some sign that the man I loved still existed somewhere inside the stranger who had humiliated me. Hours passed. I watched the clock on the cable box tick from midnight to 1 to 2. At some point, I stopped crying. The tears dried up, leaving behind a strange, hollow calm. My mind, which had been a chaotic storm of pain and disbelief, began to clear. I started thinking, really thinking, about Mark, about his family, about the 5 years I had spent trying to fit into a world that had never wanted me. I thought about all the small cruelties I had overlooked. The comments about my clothes, the jokes about my cooking, the way Victoria would introduce me as Mark's wife instead of using my name, the way Paige would roll her eyes when I spoke, the way Mark would stand by, silent, while they picked me apart. I thought about the times I had defended him to my own family. He's just stressed from work. His family is complicated. He loves me, really. I had spent 5 years making excuses for a man who, it turned out, saw me as nothing more than a curiosity, a project, a cultural exchange. When Mark finally came home, it was after 3 in the morning. I heard the key in the lock, the stumble of footsteps, the fumbling with the alarm system. He was drunk, very drunk. He flicked on the living room light and squinted at me, sitting on the floor. "Lily, what are you doing down there?" His voice was thick, slurred. I didn't answer. I just looked at him. He swayed, then walked past me into the kitchen. I heard him open the refrigerator, then close it. He came back into the living room, a bottle of water in his hand. "You left," he said, as if this was the first he was hearing of it. "Why did you leave?" I stood up slowly, my legs stiff from sitting so long. "You know why, Mark." He blinked at me, genuinely confused. "Because of the toast? Lily, that was hours ago. It was a joke. Everyone thought it was funny." "Everyone," I said, my voice quiet. "You mean your mother who was smiling, your sister who was recording it on her phone, your friends who laughed. Those people," he sighed, the same exasperated sigh I had heard 1,000 times. "Yes, those people, my family, my friends, the people who matter." The words hung in the air between us. The people who matter, not me, I didn't matter. "I matter," I said, and even to my own ears, my voice sounded small. "I'm your wife. I'm supposed to matter most of all." He laughed then, a short, humorless laugh. "Don't be dramatic, of course you matter. But you have to understand, Lily, this is how things work. My family, they have a certain way of communicating. It's all in good fun. You need to learn to take a joke." "Take a joke?" I repeated. "You stood in front of 100 people and called me a cultural exchange. You mocked my hometown, my family, my entire life. And I'm supposed to take a joke?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of impatience I knew well. "You're so sensitive. You've always been too sensitive. It's just who you are, Lily. Small-town girl, big feelings. But you're in a different world now. You need to adapt." Different world. There it was again. The implication that my world, my real world, was lesser. That I should be grateful to be allowed into his. "I don't want to adapt anymore," I said. "I don't want to be someone I'm not just to make your family comfortable." He shrugged, already turning away. "Suit yourself, but don't expect me to defend you when they notice you're not trying." And with that, he walked to the bedroom, leaving me standing alone in the living room. Within minutes, I heard his snores through the closed door. I sat down again, but this time something was different. The tears didn't come. The pain was still there, a physical weight in my chest, but it was accompanied by something else. Something cold, something hard. Something that felt, for the first time in 5 years, like clarity. I thought about my father, who had spent his life building up young people, teaching them that they could be anything, do anything. I thought about my mother, who had held the hands of dying patients and brought new life into the world, who had taught me that strength wasn't about never breaking, but about putting yourself back together after you did. I thought about Millbrook, with its water tower and its strip malls and its Friday night lights. I thought about the people there, who might not have money or connections, but who had something the Ashfords would never understand. They had each other. They had community. They had love that wasn't conditional on fitting in. And I thought about myself, the girl I had been before Mark Ashford walked into that coffee shop. That girl had dreams. That girl had confidence. That girl knew who she was and where she came from. Somewhere along the way, I had lost her. I had traded her for a fairy tale that turned out to be a prison. I made a decision that night, sitting on the floor of my beautiful apartment in the dark. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. I wasn't going to cry and plead and try to make him love me. I wasn't going to run home to Ohio with my tail between my legs, confirming everything they believed about me. I was going to stay, and I was going to make them regret the day they decided to make me their punchline. The next morning, I woke up before him. I made coffee, my movements mechanical, my mind racing. I looked at him, still sleeping, his face slack and peaceful. I felt nothing but a deep, resounding emptiness where my love for him used to be. I walked over to his nightstand. His phone was lying there. I picked it up. His passcode was our anniversary, a date he claimed to always forget. I typed it in. It opened. I didn't go through his messages or his photos. I went straight to his contacts. I scrolled to his mother's number and memorized it. Then his sister's, then his father's, then the numbers for his two best friends from college, the ones who had laughed the hardest at his joke. I closed the phone and put it back. The first step in any war is intelligence. For 5 years, I had been the quiet one, the observer in the corner. I listened more than I talked. And in that time, I had heard things. I had seen things. I had been building a library of information without even knowing it. Mark, in his arrogance, in his belief that I was too simple to understand, had talked freely in front of me. He'd take business calls in the living room, discussing confidential deals and bad-mouthing partners. He'd vent about his family, revealing their secrets and their weaknesses. He'd drunkenly brag to friends about financial maneuvers that sounded, to my ears, dangerously close to the line of legality. I had been a silent witness to it all. It was time to become an active one. Over the next few weeks, I became a ghost in my own home, a perfect, quiet, attentive wife. I made Mark his favorite dinners. I laughed at his jokes. I even went with him to his parents' house for Sunday dinner, sitting through Paige's barbs with a serene smile that unnerved them. They whispered about how well I was taking it, how I must have finally understood that it was all in good fun. They thought they had broken me into submission. They had no idea they had just armed me. The first piece of serious evidence came 2 weeks after the party. Mark came home late one night, clearly agitated. He went straight to his office and closed the door, which was unusual. I pressed my ear to the door and heard him on the phone, his voice low and urgent. He was arguing with someone about a transfer of funds, something about needing to cover tracks before the quarterly audit. My heart pounded. This wasn't just office gossip. This was real. I waited until I heard him hang up and go to the bathroom. Then I slipped into his office. His laptop was still open, the screen lit with a spreadsheet I couldn't fully understand. But I saw numbers, large numbers, and I saw notations that looked suspicious. I didn't have time to copy anything then, but I knew what I had to do. The next day, I went to an electronics store in a town 30 miles away, paying in cash. I bought a small, encrypted flash drive. I also bought a simple digital voice recorder. That night, when Mark was in the shower, I placed the recorder under his desk, tucked behind a bookshelf where it wouldn't be seen. It was a risk, but I was learning that revenge required risk. For the next week, I collected audio. I would retrieve the recorder each morning while he slept and listen to the files on my headphones, categorizing and noting anything useful. Most of it was mundane business calls, but there were gems. A call with his business partner, Derek, where they discussed adjusting some inventory numbers. A call with his mother where she advised him to move money out of a joint account we had, just in case Lily ever gets any ideas. That one hurt, but it also hardened my resolve further. I also started paying attention to his schedule. He thought I didn't notice when he came home late, when he smelled of perfume that wasn't mine, when his phone buzzed with messages he would read and then delete. I noted it all. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I just added it to my growing file. One night, about a month after the party, he didn't come home at all. He texted at 2 a.m. saying he was staying at a friend's place after too much to drink. I didn't believe him. The next morning, when he finally came home, I went through his wallet while he showered. I found a receipt from a hotel across town, dated the night before. I took a photo with my phone and put the receipt back. That was the moment I stopped thinking of myself as his wife and started thinking of myself as his adversary. The affair, if that's what it was, didn't hurt as much as the toast. The toast had been public. The toast had been deliberate. The toast had been him choosing his family's approval over my dignity. Compared to that, a hotel receipt was just confirmation of what I already knew. He was not the man I had married. Maybe he never had been. While I was digging, I also started planting. I joined a local gym and a book club. I made new friends, women who had nothing to do with Mark's world. They were teachers, nurses, small business owners. They were real. They didn't judge me for my background. They didn't know about the Ashfords or the money or the humiliation. With them, I could just be Lily. And in being Lily, I started to remember who I was before Mark. My new friend Jenny was a kindergarten teacher at a school across town. We met at the gym, bonding over our shared hatred of early morning workouts. She was from a small town in Iowa, and we spent hours trading stories about growing up in places where everyone knew your name. She had a husband who adored her, 2 kids she talked about constantly, and a life that seemed genuinely happy. Being around her made me realize how empty my own life had become. My other new friend, Maria, was a nurse like my mother. She worked nights at the same hospital where my mother had worked for years, and we bonded over our shared understanding of what that life was like. She was divorced, raising 2 teenagers on her own, and she had a strength that I admired. She didn't complain about her ex-husband, but she also didn't make excuses for him. He was who he was, and she had moved on. I wanted that kind of strength. I also started a small, anonymous blog about personal finance and investing using a pseudonym. It was surprisingly easy. I had a knack for making complex topics simple, a skill I'd honed trying to explain Mark's world to my own parents. The blog gained a small, loyal following. People would comment with questions, and I'd answer them. It gave me a sense of purpose, a feeling that I had value beyond being Mark Ashford's wife. The blog started as a way to pass the time, but it quickly became something more. I wrote about budgeting for people who had never been taught. I wrote about investing for beginners, breaking down terms like dividends and mutual funds into language anyone could understand. I wrote about the psychological aspects of money, the way it could be used as a tool for control or liberation. The more I wrote, the more I realized how much I had learned in the past 5 years. Living in Mark's world, even as an outsider, had taught me things I never would have learned otherwise. I knew how wealthy people thought about money. I knew the games they played. I knew the secrets they kept. And now, I was sharing that knowledge with people who needed it. I also reconnected with an old college friend, Sarah, who was now a junior associate at a prestigious law firm in the city. We'd meet for coffee, and I'd tell her about my life, my voice perfectly sad and confused. I'd mention, with wide-eyed innocence, some of the things I'd found on Mark's computer. "Is that normal?" I'd ask her. "He seemed so upset about it. I'm just worried about him." Sarah, a sharp and principled woman, would listen, her face growing more and more concerned. She started giving me advice, not as a lawyer representing me, but as a friend. "Lily, you need to document this, just in case. Keep everything." I took her advice literally. I created a system. I had a spreadsheet tracking every file, every recording, every date. I had folders organized by category: financial misconduct, personal betrayals, family secrets. I had transcripts of the most damning voice memos, typed out word for word. I had copies of emails forwarded to a secure account Mark could never find. I was building a case, a comprehensive dossier that left no stone unturned. 3 months after the party, I found the mother lode. Mark had a personal laptop he kept in a locked drawer in his office. One night, he forgot to lock it. I waited until he was asleep, then carefully opened the drawer. The laptop was there. I booted it up. He used the same password for everything. Inside, I found a folder simply labeled MISC. It was filled with voice memos. I put my earphones in and listened. My blood ran cold. They were recordings of phone calls with his mother, discussing me in the most vicious terms, planning how to manage me, how to make sure I never had any claim to real family money. They laughed about my clothes, my family, my quaint ideas about marriage. In one, Victoria suggested Mark should have an affair with a suitable woman just to keep his options open. Mark's laughing response was, "Mom, don't worry. Lily's too naive to ever figure anything out. She thinks love conquers all." I listened to that one 3 times. Each time, the last shred of hesitation I had vanished. I copied the entire folder to my flash drive. I also found a series of photos from his business trips that were clearly not business. Women in hotel rooms, at casinos, on yachts. I copied those too. The next phase of my plan required me to become someone new. I started dressing differently, not for Mark, but for myself. I bought clothes that made me feel powerful, not pretty. I changed my hairstyle. I started going to the gym regularly, not to lose weight, but to feel strong. I was rebuilding myself from the inside out, and it felt incredible. I also started paying closer attention to the family dynamics. I learned that Victoria's greatest fear was scandal. The Ashford reputation was everything to her. Paige's greatest weakness was her own marriage, which was crumbling under the weight of her husband's infidelity, something she desperately tried to hide. Mark's father, Richard, was a quiet man who seemed genuinely unaware of his wife and daughter's cruelty. He was focused entirely on the business. I realized that if I wanted maximum impact, I needed to target each of them where it hurt most. For Victoria, the scandal of her son's financial crimes would be devastating. For Paige, the exposure of her own failing marriage alongside the family drama would be humiliating. For Richard, the proof that his son was embezzling from the company he built would be a betrayal beyond words. And for Mark, losing everything: his job, his reputation, his family's respect, his friends would be the perfect punishment. I continued my double life for another 3 months. By day, I was the perfect wife, attending family functions with a serene smile, enduring Paige's jabs with grace that confused and annoyed her. By night, I was an investigator, a strategist, a woman building a weapon of mass destruction aimed at the heart of the Ashford family. During this time, I also started preparing for my own future. I opened a bank account in my name only, at a different bank than the one Mark used. I started transferring small amounts of money I earned from tutoring and from my blog, into that account. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I also started researching apartments, looking at neighborhoods where I could afford to live on my own. I was building an escape route, just in case. My blog continued to grow. I started getting emails from readers, women who shared their own stories of financial dependence and the fear that came with it. I answered every email, offering advice and encouragement. I started to feel like I was making a difference, like my pain was being transformed into something useful. It was the first time in years that I felt truly alive. The 6-month anniversary of the engagement party fell on a Sunday. Mark's family was having another gathering, this time a small dinner to celebrate Victoria's birthday. I told Mark I had a terrible migraine. He barely looked up from his phone. "Fine, I'll tell them you're resting. Probably for the best." After he left, I got to work. I had everything I needed. I transferred the final files from the flash drive to a secure cloud account, one Mark could never find. Then, I opened a new email draft. The recipient list was long. His father, Richard, his mother, Victoria, his sister, Paige, his 2 best friends from college, his business partner, Derek, and the head of the family's holding company, a man named Arthur Sterling whom Mark feared and respected. I attached the financial documents, the damning emails, the photos from his trips, and the voice memos, transcribed neatly into a PDF. I didn't add any commentary. I didn't need to. The truth was far more damning than anything I could say. The subject line was simple: "For your information." I paused with my finger over the send button. This was it. This was the point of no return. I thought about the girl from Ohio who had arrived here 5 years ago, full of love and hope. I thought about the woman at the party, frozen in the spotlight of her husband's cruelty. I thought about the cold, quiet rage that had kept me going for 6 months. I pressed send. I turned off my phone and went to bed. I slept better than I had in years. The next morning, the silence was deafening. I made coffee and toast, waiting. My phone, still off, sat on the counter like a bomb. At 8 a.m., the doorbell rang. It was a courier with a large envelope. Inside was a legal notice. Mark Ashford had been temporarily removed from his position at the family company, pending an investigation into financial misconduct. His access to all accounts had been frozen. At 9 a.m., my phone, which I had finally turned on, exploded. Texts from Mark, first confused, then angry, then pleading. "Lily, what have you done? My father is going crazy. Where did those emails come from? Please just talk to me." I didn't respond. At 9:30, my phone rang. It was Sarah. "Lily, are you okay? I'm seeing some rumblings about the Ashford company. Is this related to what we discussed?" I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "You need a lawyer. Officially, I can't represent you because of conflict, but I can recommend someone excellent. And Lily, whatever you do, don't talk to any of them without representation." At 10 a.m., there was a pounding on the front door. I opened it. It was Victoria. She looked 10 years older. Her face, usually so composed, was a mask of fury and fear. Paige was behind her, her eyes red from crying. "You," Victoria hissed, her voice trembling, "you little snake. You did this, you destroyed my son, you destroyed this family." I looked at her, this woman who had orchestrated my humiliation for years, who had plotted with her son to keep me in my place. I felt a profound and total peace. "No, Victoria," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I didn't destroy your son, I just showed everyone what you and he built. I just took the mask off." "You had no right," she spat. "Those were private family matters. So was the toast at the engagement party," I said quietly, "but you all seemed to think that was public entertainment." Paige stepped forward, her voice cracking. "You'll never get away with this. We'll sue you, we'll ruin you." I almost smiled. "Sue me for what?" "For forwarding evidence of a crime to the people it affects. For sharing voice memos where you all plotted against me. I don't think you want a jury to hear those. I don't think you want a judge to hear about the family trust and how you've been mismanaging it. I've kept copies of everything. And I have a very good lawyer, a friend from college, who is very excited to take this case. So please, Paige, sue me. It would be my pleasure." They stared at me, their faces a mixture of hatred and dawning horror. They saw it then. They saw that the quiet, naive little wife from Ohio was gone. In her place was someone they had created, someone forged in the fire of their own cruelty. They had taught me their language of power and leverage, and I had learned it well. I closed the door in their faces. Mark didn't come home that night. Or the next. When he finally did, a week later, he looked like a ghost. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes were hollow. The golden boy had fallen, and hard. His family had turned on him, protecting the company's reputation by making him the sole scapegoat. His friends, the ones who had laughed at me, had distanced themselves. He was alone. He stood in the doorway of the living room, where I was sitting, reading a book. The divorce papers were already drawn up, waiting on the coffee table. "Why?" he asked, his voice a broken whisper. It wasn't an angry why, it was a genuinely confused one. He truly didn't understand. I put my book down and looked at him. I saw the man I had loved, and I felt a faint, distant pang of sorrow for that love. But it was like mourning someone who had died a long time ago. "You asked me once to show you who I really was, Mark. In front of all your family. You held me up as a joke, a specimen from a world you thought was beneath you. You wanted a cultural exchange." I stood up, picking up the divorce papers. "So, I decided to give you one. A full, immersive experience. This is my world, Mark. The one with the strip malls and the water towers. It's a world where people learn that actions have consequences. Where cruelty isn't just a punchline. Where a quiet person isn't necessarily a weak one. I hope you've enjoyed your little window into it." I walked past him, out the door, and into my new life. I left him standing there, in the ruins of the world he had built on my humiliation. I didn't look back. The girl who had cried in the car that night was gone. In her place was a woman who had learned that sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't about getting even. It's about becoming so much more than they ever thought you could be, and in doing so, leaving them far, far behind. The months that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and new beginnings. The divorce was finalized quickly. Mark, facing potential criminal charges, was in no position to fight me on anything. I walked away with a settlement that was fair, though I had refused to take a penny more than what I was legally entitled to. I didn't want their money. I wanted my freedom. The fallout from my email was more extensive than I could have imagined. The family company underwent a full audit, which uncovered not just Mark's misdeeds, but also some questionable practices by other family members. Richard, in a move that shocked everyone, stepped down as CEO and brought in outside leadership to clean house. Victoria's social circle, always fragile, crumbled as the scandal made its way through the gossip channels. Paige's husband, already on shaky ground, filed for divorce, citing the public humiliation. The Ashford empire, built on appearances and old money, was cracking from within. I watched it all from a distance, not with satisfaction, but with a strange sense of detachment. It was like watching a movie about someone else's life. The woman who had been married to Mark Ashford felt like a character I had once played, not who I really was. I moved to a small apartment in a different part of the city, one that felt more like home. It was in a neighborhood called Oakwood, a place with tree-lined streets and front porches and children playing in the yards. It reminded me of Millbrook. I furnished it with things I chose myself, not things selected by a decorator to impress Mark's friends. I bought a comfortable sofa from a local furniture store, a wooden dining table that had been handcrafted by a man in the next town over, and bookshelves that I filled with books I actually wanted to read. I had a small garden on my balcony where I grew herbs and flowers. I adopted a cat from the local shelter, a scruffy orange tabby I named Finn. He was nothing like the purebred dogs the Ashfords favored, and I loved him for it. My blog had grown during the months I was planning my revenge. I had been posting regularly, building a community of readers who appreciated my straightforward, no-nonsense advice. After the divorce, I decided to come out from behind the pseudonym. I wrote a post titled Starting Over, a personal story, in which I shared my journey without naming names or going into salacious detail. I talked about finding strength after humiliation, about rebuilding a life from scratch, about the power of financial independence. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of comments poured in from women who had experienced similar situations. They shared their own stories of being belittled, dismissed, and betrayed. They thanked me for giving them hope. Encouraged by the response, I expanded the blog into a full website. I started offering online courses on personal finance for women. I partnered with a small publisher to write a book, which I titled Your Hidden Strength, a guide to financial independence and personal power. The advance was modest, but it was mine. Every word I wrote was mine. Every decision I made was mine. Sarah and I remained close. She had left the big law firm and started her own practice focused on helping women in difficult divorces. We would have dinner once a week, and she would tell me about her cases, and I would tell her about my writing. We were both building lives on our own terms, and it felt good. One day, about a year after the divorce, I received a letter. It was from Mark. The return address was a P.O. box in a town I didn't recognize. I almost threw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. The letter was rambling and disjointed. He wrote about losing everything, about his family disowning him, about his friends vanishing. He wrote about the criminal charges that had been dropped due to lack of evidence, but the damage to his reputation was permanent. He couldn't find work in finance anymore. He was living in a small apartment, working at a car dealership, a job he called beneath him. He wrote that he thought about that night at the party often, about the look on my face. He said he finally understood. He said he was sorry. I read the letter 3 times. I waited for the satisfaction to come, the feeling of victory I had imagined for so long. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt a deep, profound sadness. Not for him, but for the person I had been, the person who had loved him, the person who had believed in fairy tales. That person was gone, and in her place was someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more real. Mark's apology changed nothing. It didn't erase the years of small cruelties. It didn't undo the public humiliation. But it did confirm something I had come to believe. That people like Mark, people who build their lives on the diminishment of others, always end up alone. Their punishment is themselves. I didn't respond to the letter. I put it in a drawer and forgot about it. My book was published 6 months later. It became a modest bestseller, not enough to make me rich, but enough to give me financial security and, more importantly, a platform. I started getting invitations to speak at conferences, to appear on podcasts, to write for major publications. I traveled to cities I had only read about. Meeting women who told me my story had inspired them to leave bad marriages, to start their own businesses, to take control of their finances. It was overwhelming and humbling. 2 years after the party, I found myself back in Ohio, visiting my parents. My father had retired from being principal, and my mother had cut back her nursing hours to part-time. They were proud of me, though my mother worried that I was alone. "Don't you want to find someone, honey?" she would ask. I would smile and tell her that I had found someone. I had found myself. I took a walk through my old neighborhood, past the high school where I had cheered on Friday nights, past the little diner where I had my first job, past the park where I had learned to ride a bike. Everything was smaller than I remembered, but also more real. This was where I came from. This was the foundation of who I was. And for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of it. I thought about the Ashfords and their world of country clubs and summer homes. I thought about how they had looked at me, this girl from Ohio, as if I were a curiosity, a specimen from a lesser species. I thought about how I had let them make me feel small, how I had apologized for my existence in their presence. I would never do that again. I would never apologize for who I was or where I came from. On my way back to the airport, I passed a small bookstore. In the window, there was a display of local authors, and there, in the corner, was my book. Your Hidden Strength by Lily Chen, my maiden name. I had chosen to use it to reclaim it. I stood there for a long time, looking at it. A woman walking by stopped and looked at the display. She pointed at my book and said to her friend, "Oh, I read that. It changed my life." They walked on, unaware that the author was standing right next to them. I got on the plane back to my new life, my real life. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from that horrible night at the country club to this moment of quiet triumph. It hadn't been easy. There were days when the anger threatened to consume me, when the memories of the humiliation burned fresh. But I had learned to channel that energy into something productive, something that built instead of destroyed. I had learned that revenge, true revenge, isn't about making someone else suffer. It's about refusing to let their cruelty define you. It's about taking the pain they inflicted and transforming it into power. It's about becoming so fully yourself, so completely and unapologetically yourself, that their opinion becomes irrelevant. Mark had tried to break me. His family had tried to diminish me. They had used my background, my simplicity, my love as weapons against me. And for a while, it worked. I was broken. I was diminished. But from the ashes of that broken girl, a new woman rose. A woman who knew her worth. A woman who could not be humiliated because she no longer sought their approval. A woman who had learned that the only validation that matters comes from within. I still think about that party sometimes. I think about the look on Mark's face when he raised his glass to toast my humiliation. I think about Victoria's barely concealed smile, Paige's gleeful recording. I think about the silence that fell over the table, the averted eyes, the awkward applause. And I think about the woman I was in that moment, frozen, shattered, invisible. But then I think about the woman I became, the woman who gathered evidence in the dark, the woman who smiled through Sunday dinners while planning their destruction, the woman who pressed send on that email and walked away from the wreckage without looking back, the woman who wrote a book that changed lives, the woman standing in an airport going home to a life she built with her own two hands. That woman is me, Lily, from Ohio, and I am not a punchline. I am not a cultural exchange. I am not a window into another world. I am my own world, entire and complete, and it is beautiful here. Sometimes, Sarah asks me if I ever regret it, not the divorce, but the revenge. The planning, the deceit, the deliberate destruction of another person's life. I always tell her the same thing. I didn't destroy Mark's life. I just showed him the truth of it. I held up a mirror to the man he had become, the family he had enabled, the cruelty he had normalized. If that mirror shattered him, it was because he was already broken. And me, I was broken too that night. But I picked up the pieces and built something new, something stronger, something real. That is the only revenge worth taking. 3 years after the party, I received an invitation. It was for Paige's second wedding. She was marrying a man she had met at a divorce support group, of all places. The invitation was simple, nothing like the lavish affairs the Ashfords used to host. It was being held at a small venue, a garden in the suburbs, with a reception to follow at a local restaurant. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if it was a joke, a trap, or something else entirely. I didn't go, but I did send a gift. A copy of my book inscribed with a simple message, "Wishing you the happiness you deserve. Best wishes, Lily." I never heard back from her. I didn't expect to. My mother passed away 2 years later. It was sudden, a heart attack that took her before anyone could say goodbye. I flew home for the funeral, and the church was packed with people whose lives she had touched. Nurses she had worked with, patients she had cared for, neighbors she had helped, students my father had taught who remembered her kindness at school events. The pastor spoke about her generosity, her strength, her unwavering love for her family. I sat in the front row, holding my father's hand, and I thought about how different this was from the Ashford funerals I had attended, where the focus was on appearances and social standing. Here, the focus was on a life well lived, a life that mattered. After the funeral, my father and I sat on the porch swing he had built so many years ago. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. We just sat, watching the sunset, remembering the woman who had held us together. She was proud of you, my father said finally. So proud. She used to cut out every article, every mention of your book. She had a whole scrapbook. I smiled through my tears. I know, she told me every time we talked. She worried about you, though, he said, after everything. She worried that you would close yourself off, that you wouldn't let yourself be happy again. I thought about his words for a long time after I returned to my apartment. Was I happy? I was successful. I was independent. I had friends and purpose and a life I had built myself. But was I happy? I wasn't sure I knew what happiness felt like anymore. I knew what satisfaction felt like. I knew what pride felt like. But happiness, the kind I had felt as a child, the kind I had felt in the early days with Mark, that seemed like a distant memory. I started seeing a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Chen who specialized in helping people rebuild after trauma. She helped me understand that what I had done, while justified, had also taken a toll. I had spent so long being angry, so long planning, so long focused on revenge, that I had forgotten how to just be. I had forgotten how to let people in. It took time, but slowly I started to open up. I started dating, cautiously at first. I met a man named David at a book signing. He was an English teacher at a local high school, and he had read my book. He wasn't impressed by my success. He was impressed by my story. We talked for hours that night, about books and teaching and growing up in small towns. He was from a place much like Millbrook, and he understood me in a way Mark never had. We took things slowly, very slowly. I was honest with him about my past, about what I had done. He listened without judgment. You did what you had to do, he said. I can't imagine going through what you went through. I'm just glad you came out the other side. 5 years after the party, David and I got married in a small ceremony at my father's house. My father walked me down the aisle, which was just a path through the backyard garden my mother had planted years ago. Sarah was my maid of honor. Jenny and Maria were there, along with a handful of other friends I had made along the way. David's family came, bringing casseroles and homemade pies and the kind of warmth I had missed for so long. In my vows, I talked about rebuilding. I talked about learning to trust again. I talked about the woman I had been and the woman I had become. And I talked about the future, a future I was finally ready to embrace. Mark sent a card. It was simple, just a congratulations and a hope that I was happy. I believed him. I hoped he had found some peace too. I still write. My blog has become a full-time job with thousands of readers and a team of contributors. I've written 2 more books, both bestsellers. I travel and speak and meet incredible women who share their stories with me. Every time I hear a story of survival, of triumph over cruelty, I think about that night at the country club. I think about the woman I was, frozen in the spotlight of her husband's cruelty. And I think about the woman I became, the woman who refused to stay frozen. David and I have a daughter now. We named her Ellen, after my mother. She has my mother's eyes and my father's stubbornness. When I look at her, I see the future. I see a world where girls don't have to shrink themselves to fit in, where they don't have to apologize for who they are or where they come from. I will teach her everything my mother taught me. I will teach her about strength and kindness and the power of knowing her own worth. And I will teach her that no one, not ever, gets to make her feel small. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and everyone is asleep, I think about that party. I think about the toast, the laughter, the silence that followed. I think about the drive home, the tears, the screaming in the car. I think about the years of planning, the evidence gathered in the dark, the email sent with a steady hand. I think about the look on Victoria's face when she realized what I had done. I think about Mark, standing in the doorway, broken and confused. And I think about the woman who walked out that door, who didn't look back, who built a new life from the ashes of the old one. That woman is me, Lily, from Ohio. And I am proud of the journey that brought me here. The cultural exchange is over. I have nothing left to teach them, but I have everything left to teach myself, and my daughter, and anyone else who needs to hear that the quiet ones, the ones they underestimate, are often the ones with the deepest strength.